Hi Alison, it's great to meet you. My name's Cleo.
Hi Cleo, it's great to meet you. I'm interested to find out all about you. I think we share something in common. Are you from locally or?
Right, I'm actually from Sheffield and I'm a business development manager for a local charity there.
Oh, lovely. I'm from Brighton and I'm a foster carer. I mainly foster mums and babies, all sorts of children really, but I understand we've got something in common.
Yeah, we definitely have, and I'm really keen to kind of find out a little bit more about your experience and see if there's any synergy between
No, definitely.
mine.
We're family members of prisoners. Who have you had in prison?
So it's my dad that's actually spent time in prison, so yeah, the story kind of all relates to him and my experience of him being in there.
Yeah, mine is my son's. Obviously, it's been a bit of a horrendous journey.
You know, unless you've got kind of a relative, a friend, or, you know, somebody close to you in prison, then you can't possibly imagine kind of the things that happen in there.
No. I've woken up and thought, I cannot believe that this goes on in this country when it's supposed to be a civilised country, and the treatment that we've had is unbelievable. My son was sent to prison. Completely didn't know anything about the system, nothing at all, complete shock. I didn't even know that you had to, you could book a visit within 48 hours. There was no information on the internet. I couldn't get hold of anybody. When you phoned the prison, it rang and rang. I did manage to get a visit within 48 hours. So, interesting enough, my son he didn't know his dad's date of birth, so he knew mine and obviously my name, but he didn't know his dad's date of birth, so that's the only reason why only I could go for the visit. And then when I went in to see him, I asked the prison officer if I could hug him. I didn't even know if I was allowed to touch him. And it was really awful because I could see he was holding back the tears and wanting to be strong and for me not to worry. Sorry, I get a bit emotional because it's still quite raw for me. And I was trying to be strong because I didn't want him to see that I was upset.
Yeah.
And my son was under psychiatrist on antipsychotic medication. We weren't allowed to hand it in. He had to see somebody there. So they let him go cold turkey on antipsychotic medication. They took 6-8 weeks before he saw somebody who said he wasn't psychotic, he was depressed, and gave him antidepressant medication. My doctor wrote, the psychiatrist wrote, they ignored them. I got my local MP to write, he was ignored. It's like they want to rub you out and that you don't matter. And actually, for me, I had vital information about my son. He tried to kill himself a couple of times. He cut all his wrists. I mean, he's still got the scars now. And nobody listened. And when I tried to say, it was like they tried to make out I was the one that had the problem and that I was the one that was mad and crazy. And I find that also shocking because it's supposed to be, don't we want them to come out better than they went in? Is that not what the system is meant to be?
Totally agree. I mean, my story's kind of, I suppose, a little bit different to yours in a way. I'm kind of a little bit envious that you managed to actually get into the prison and visit your son, because I didn't actually even manage to kind of get through the prison gate. It took me 8 weeks to actually even figure out where he was. My dad's paranoid schizophrenic. He's been a paranoid schizophrenic certainly all of my life, but the majority of the time that illness has been manageable with antipsychotic medication. For whatever reason, he kind of slipped off the NHS radar and wasn't getting the support he needed. As his closest kind of living relative, you know, I noticed straight away that his mental health was going, you know, declining. The paranoia kind of took a grip and meant that he was displaying antisocial behaviour out on the street, ranting and raving, you know, looking at everybody as, you know, as the enemy. Anyway, he basically, his verbal abuse out on the street meant that he was picked up by the police. The police know me very well. They know that he's mentally ill, but they're just doing their job. If somebody calls and says that they're scared, that there's somebody out kind of ranting and raving, then they have to turn up and do something. They detained him overnight, took him to the court in the morning. I wasn't made aware of this. I wasn't able to get to the courts. And basically, he displayed exactly those same characteristics as he had in the police station, as he had in the street. He then displayed those in the courtroom. They then decided that they needed to remand him. He got remanded again without my knowledge, but within, a few hours of me not hearing from him, I knew that something had happened. I spoke to the police, I spoke to the safeguarding teams. GDPR meant that they weren't able to disclose to me kind of where he was. So then somebody said, actually what you need to do is locate a prisoner, because there's every chance he's probably in prison. So I went on Google, I went on the government website, I filled in a form. I expected that, within a couple of days I would get some notification as to where he was, but unfortunately I didn't, and actually I got notification, I think it was about 8 weeks. 8 weeks I'd been calling, 8 weeks I'd been, emailing. I had my MP on the case, local councillors, there was absolutely no stone left unturned. Eventually, kind of when I found out where he was, you can't go and visit someone unless they send you a visiting order. And if that person is so mentally unstable that they're not even able to fill in a form or go through that process, then you're not going to get a visit, whether you like it or not. It later transpired that obviously his mental health was on decline. We knew that he was suffering from psychosis when he was taken in there. But as well as kind of having mental health problems, he didn't have any glasses. So he would have never been able to look at any paperwork, fill in any forms, or be able to contact me. He was in the prison for, I'd say about 12 months. I wasn't able to go to any of his court hearings because I didn't know when they were. He didn't have a solicitor because he was too paranoid to accept one. The only suggestion that people gave me as to being able to kind of turn up to his court hearings was to ring the court every morning to find out who was being kind of put before the courts. But obviously with the pandemic, these cases weren't being heard in a courtroom. If this wasn't happening to me and I was hearing this story about somebody else, I don't even think I would be able to believe that this kind of thing happens.
I think that I argued all the time, about data protection. I was so fed up with it. And I was like, I know him, I'm his mother, and I found a lot of hostility from, I was obviously going into prisons and that. I found that it's almost like they're not people. And what I found really hard is they're allowed to write in the paper all about their crime and what they've done and all that, but they can't tell you where he is. That's shocking, really. Yeah. I was lucky enough to know where my son was. We did get a phone call one day from him saying that they're moving me, and they were moving him to a place called Swinfen Hall. And I couldn't get a visit till Boxing Day, so I'd not seen him for like about 5 weeks. So we drove up, and he was filthy. He'd lost so much weight. He was completely paranoid. My son's a paranoid schizophrenic as well. He was completely paranoid. He said that he could hear them. He could hear them through the walls and all of that. And I was trying to tell the prison guard, I went up to the desk and said, and they're not interested, and there's no one you can phone, there's absolutely no one, and it's like nobody cares, and I really struggled with that. It was easier to sort of ridicule us and make us, prison officers have said, if it wasn't for you, he wouldn't be in here and things like that. I've been outside prison waiting when a van's turned up and they go, oh, fresh meat, and not things you want to hear, do you know what I mean? I certainly wouldn't be saying that in my job. I'd lose my job if I said things like that, but and I think when they finally realised, they called me up for a meeting. I'd been saying he wasn't very well. I had a visit with him and he told me he couldn't go on anymore and he was going to hang himself, and he knew how to tie the sheets together and that. And I got up and I sort of walked to the desk and I was sobbing, and he was like, oh, he'll be fine. It was just completely dismissed, do you know what I mean? They phoned me the next morning to say he was very ill and he had a urine infection, but he was so psychotic, he was off the wall. I mean, how they never noticed that, I don't know. And very emotional as well, because obviously he's got brothers and sisters and a dad and a nan, and I was trying to hold all of those together and not deal with how I felt, because if I wobbled, then everybody else would fall apart.
Yeah, no, I totally kind of relate to that kind of, you know, within our family kind of network, I'm the one that will be the spokesperson.
Yeah.
I'll be the one pushing to the front, kind of, you know, talking on behalf of everybody else. Yeah, I mean, your story sounds kind of absolutely horrendous. I mean, for me, kind of obviously not being able to go into the prison, not being able to visit him, knowing just how gravely ill he was and knowing that that situation wasn't going to get any better, I think for me that was it. Only way I can describe it is like I was serving a prison sentence with him. Because, you know, but I also had to get on with my day-to-day life, so I still had to turn up to work. I still had to look after, you know, my little boy. I was obviously still kind of a wife, a daughter, and all of those other things. But at night, you know, I was thinking, what's happening to my dad? Where is he? How is he? Waiting for a call for someone to tell me that he was dead was a very realistic possibility for me. It wasn't a prison he needed, it was a hospital.
And my frustration was that nobody believed me that he was ill. You know, the psychiatrist wrote, the doctor wrote, everybody, you know, sort of saying, this lad is psychotic, he's having a psychotic episode, this is his medication, and nobody believed me, and they just ignored those letters, and they didn't believe me. I mean, I got my son's prison record, and in it says he's fine it actually says till the mother turns up and fills his head with ideas. I mean, I wrote to Pact, and they wrote on my behalf to the prison, and I don't think the governor ever thought I would see the letter, but Pact sent it to me, and it said that there's nothing the matter with him and it's me, and it was easier to ridicule me than deal with the fact that he was so ill. When they eventually realised he was really ill, and they had somebody in to see him who said he was psychotic, the prison phoned me up for a meeting, and they made the meeting at 9:30 in the morning, knowing I'd had to travel from Brighton. It would take me at least 3 hours in rush hour traffic. And we had the meeting, and they said he's really ill. Oh, and by the way, do you know he's cut his arms? And I said, no, nobody had told me. And when I saw him, his arms were slashed. They weren't just cut. I mean, they were completely slashed, and I had to pretend to not be shocked. And they told me that they were going to move him to a prison with a hospital wing, and they were very dismissive. They weren't particularly empathy or anything like that. Not for me, and certainly not for him. And what I found was, it made me laugh, because I said, could you tell me when you're going to move him? Can you tell me? And they said no, in case I drove up and tried to rescue him. Do you know what I mean? Which I thought was completely absurd, but there you go. So when he was moved to a prison with a hospital which was Huel, we had a very different experience. They were very good, and they did get a psychiatrist in. Interesting enough, 6 weeks after they told me there was nothing the matter with him, he was sectioned, and he spent over 2 years in a medium secure hospital to try and be stabilised because of how much damage had been done to him.
Wow, yeah, I mean, that's kind of... It's really shocking, but it's not unsurprising in the same, in the same respect. I mean, for me, as I say, I kind of knew that something had happened. I knew that, there was every chance my dad was in prison, but I didn't know where he was. Spent a lot of time kind of crying myself to sleep, thinking, what am I going to do? But, failure's never been an option for me.
No.
Not where he's concerned, absolutely not. And actually somebody gave me a number for Pact, I actually called Pact, but I was kind of, when I called them, thought, oh, do you know, this is just going to be one of those, another call centre where they're going to give me another number and tell me to call another person, and we're just going to be on this kind of, you know, this kind of never-ending cyclic circle. But actually I spoke to that person and they were like, you know, they actually listened to what I said. They actually agreed with me. They were the first people that actually agreed with me that this is absolutely shocking. I mean, you know, I consider myself as a person of reasonable intelligence. I think that I'm an upstanding member of the community. You know, I've never committed a crime, but I feel that, you know, there's a certain stigma attached to people that are mentally ill and in prison. And I always kind of feel that, like, you know, that people are going to judge me based on, you know, on the circumstance of others. But actually when I spoke to Pact, they kind of, you know, they weren't judging me. That communication with Pact kind of resulted in me being able to get a meeting at the prison. So I didn't get to meet my dad in prison, but I got to go to the prison and to outline to them what the issues were with my dad, what his illness was, give them the background story. Because I always thought to myself, if I just got to see them and tell them what was happening, that collectively we might be able to work together to kind of find a solution to the problem. So they said that they would keep him safe. I raised all these concerns about me not getting any letters from him, not being able to get a visit from him. You know, they said that they were going to pass these messages on and try and work with him, give him some kind of support worker. I mentioned about the glasses. You know, I kind of appreciated what they were saying about they didn't make the decisions, but I wanted them to keep him safe. And actually, when he was finally released from prison, I found out that actually they hadn't kept him safe, and that he came out of that prison in a state that can only be described as being close to death. It was absolutely shocking, absolute kind of totally kind of went against his basic human rights. I don't know what these people were looking at every time they opened that door of that prison cell and saw him. But they certainly weren't looking at somebody that was in any fit state to be there.
Did nobody, no prison officer, did nobody pick up that he was psychotic?
Oh no, they knew, you know, they knew.
But they did nothing?
They did nothing, they did absolutely nothing. They all agreed with me, yes, Mrs. Metcalfe, he's definitely mentally ill, we definitely agree with that. But we don't make the decisions, and we'll have to wait till his next court case, and then, you know, there might be some kind of review done there, and, you know, it was always batting the case back to somebody else.
But even I know that if you leave somebody psychotic for a long amount of time, it makes the psychotic much, much harder to stabilise. So why do prison health cares not know that? So how did you manage to get your dad out of prison if he didn't have a solicitor, or he was too mentally unwell to sort of make any decisions himself?
Well, yeah, interesting point. Basically, I'd kind of been constantly ringing the prison, raising safeguarding alerts that were literally coming to nothing. And actually, I got a call, and it was literally the first call that I'd ever received from that prison acknowledging that I'd raised this kind of safeguarding alert. And the guy said to me, you know, we've checked on him, he's absolutely fine. And at this point, I mean, this had been going on for a year, I just lost it. Like, I literally was just hysterical. I said to him, would you like it if this happened to you? This is my dad we're talking about. He's mentally ill, he's totally vulnerable, he's everything to me. For you, he might just be kind of another number, prison number. He might be kind of just an annoyance, but for me, he's my dad, and I don't want him coming out of there in a box. So, you know, I haven't been able to speak to him for all this time. I really want to talk to him. I was hysterical, I was crying. I was like, please, I really want you to do everything you can to let him be able to speak to me. When he was on the outside, we don't live in the same town, so when we don't see each other, we speak every day, sometimes twice a day. For me not to speak to him for all of this time is absolutely unheard of. I said, I really genuinely believe that...
Sorry, I'm getting really upset. I'm sorry. It's really...
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh, it's just so awful. It just just brings back loads of memories. Sorry. It's just such about the uncaring, isn't it?
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
It's about the lack of. I mean, Steph wouldn't come to the phone. Do you know what I mean? Because he thought it was bugged and all of that. But we could go for visits. I mean, it was quite horrendous. But not to have that, you know, not to have that. It's just. You know, it goes about everything about us that's human, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know. I think for me is because he's my baby. I'm not saying it's different. I don't think it's different, but I just feel like I just feel it's just so inhumane. Do you know what I mean? You know, like that anyone thinks it's acceptable that you not to speak to your dad for a year is just who thinks that's acceptable? Did he not need you more now than he ever needed you?
Certainly. So during that call with the prison officer, I lost it. I kind of gave him a scenario of, you know, you put yourself in my shoes, you walk a mile in my shoes. If this was your dad, would you like it if you weren't able to speak to him? I really want to speak to him. I'm really worried that he's going to die in there and I'm not going to get the chance to at least, you know, have that one last conversation. And I think during that, I think with me, he could certainly tell that I was crying down the phone. And he kind of, I think there was just a bit of a penny drop moment where he dropped the computer says no, the system says no thing, and we were talking to each other kind of on a human level. And he said, look, let me go and see what I can do. So, my dad came on the phone. I knew immediately, just from him saying hello, from just that one word, I can tell exactly what his mental state is at, what level we're at. And I knew we were at the rock bottom kind of thing. And I had 2 minutes just to say to him, like, I've sent you all this money. These are all of your rights. As I'd written in all of the letters, clearly outlining to him all of his rights. He told me that he didn't have his glasses. He said he didn't have, his false teeth had gone, so he was unable to eat. He was living on kind of, he described it bread and butter. He actually said something which, which kind of sits with me. He said, I knew you wouldn't have forgotten about me and I knew that you would still be championing my cause even when I didn't see you. And it was just horrendous. And he just said, they're killing me. My skin is falling off. I can't walk. They've beat me up. They've done all of these things to me. And I really need help. So I just said to him, you know, all of the things that any daughter would say to the father, which is, you know, I'm going to make this right. You know, you've always got me no matter what, and if we don't speak, you know, like he'd already said, I'm always here championing your cause on the outside, and people are going to pay for this, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. So, and then that literally was kind of, at this point, that was it, and I could, you know, he was kind of a bit tearful himself kind of thing, but for me, I've got to kind of hold that together for him, because I've got to be that one that's in control. So immediately after I'd had that phone conversation with him, I knew that the situation was actually 10 times worse than I'd built up in my head, if that's even possible, because I was already thinking the worst. So that evening, after I'd cried a little bit and thought, God, what am I going to do? I got my phone out. I was emailing everybody saying he's dying in there and somebody needs to do something. And remember that you received this email, because if anything happens, I will personally hold you all accountable. I then raised another safeguarding alert to the prison saying, you told me that he was safe. He's telling me his skin's falling off and he cannot walk. And lo and behold, the next day, I got a call from the mental health hospital saying, your father's been brought in here. We think he's suffering from sepsis. We've had to cut his clothes off. His clothes were stuck to his body. He's got a skin condition which is covering probably about 75% of his body. He's in a very bad way, but we're doing all we can to help him. My immediate thing was, okay, right, I want to see photographic evidence of what this skin condition is, because I don't think I can't even visualise it in my head of how you're describing it. They said that the pictures were that bad that actually they weren't comfortable emailing them to me, because they felt that they needed me to be in the hospital with them, not with my father, because he was kind of being isolated. So I had an appointment with the hospital. They gave me the most horrific slideshow that I've ever seen in my whole entire life. And after that kind of slideshow, they allowed me to visit my father, and I can only describe it as he was mummified, because he was covered head to toe pretty much in bandages for his own good. And it was just shocking, absolutely shocking.
So I say lucky or unlucky enough to go and see Stefan. So I hadn't seen him for about 5, maybe 6 weeks. He was dirty, he was grey, he looked grey, he was really thin, like in the face. I hardly recognised him. I sat across the table and he smelled. He'd never been like that in his life. He showered every day. He was a mess. His hands were filthy. He looked like he dug the garden, do you know, like he'd never been like that in his life. And when I raised it, with the duty governor, she told me he had access to a shower every other day and he could wash in the sink. And I said, it's clearly not washing anywhere, do you know, like, and this is his mental health and it's not helpful for his mental health. And I was just ridiculed. I mean, I actually was told, he's here now, we're dealing with him, you need to go away, and I said, he's my son and I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't right, it's not humane, like, where is the humanity in that?
Totally.
So what do you think would have helped your dad? What do you think when he went to court?
If somebody that was a specialist in mental health came and met him at that point and did an assessment, they would have agreed with me, yes, he's suffering from psychosis, he's a paranoid schizophrenic, he isn't well, and that there needs to be a hospital order. Now, if a crime's been committed, then, okay, I understand that there's a justice system to deal with that. But if somebody's mentally ill and, they're not even able to get a fair crack of the whip in a courtroom, then I feel like we should be dealing with that mental health problem first. And if you still think that there is a case to answer thereafter, when that person is well, then, we can deal with that after. But, if somebody is clearly, mentally impaired, then they need to receive mental health support first. Their health should come first. That should be paramount. So what do you think could have been done differently kind of when he was in the prison then?
I think people to have listened to me. I had all this information about him, same as you did about your dad. And if somebody had listened, but they were so busy trying to shut me out, that actually they made the problem worse, and nobody wanted to talk to me, and they hid behind data protection. And what I was trying to say is, I'm not asking you for information, I'm trying to share information about him with you. When I'm sending in letters from a psychiatrist, when I'm sending in letters from the doctors, these are professional people. It's fine to ignore me, okay, I get that, I'm an overzealous mother or whatever, but why are you ignoring letters from professionals? Not everybody on the outside is wrong, and that's how I felt. I mean, I was told that he had to see a psychiatrist in prison and that they had to say that he was psychotic. So I then found out it was only an SHO and that they only visit the prison like 1.5 days a week. 670 people, how many people can they see in a week, or how many can they, and how long can they speak with somebody? And when they told me, my son was laying on the floor because and without a blanket, because there was lice on everything. He thought that there was lice on everything and that they were getting him and they would bite him and that. What kind of person listens to that and thinks that that's okay?
Exactly.
So what people are we employing? What people are in our prisons looking after our vulnerable people?
Exactly. It certainly starts to kind of make you wonder what the culture is within the prisons.
So do you think that's why they don't let us in, because they won't want to admit to us that there's these problems?
I really don't know. I
don't know why I was ignored. I don't know. I just wanted him to get through it and be alive. That's all I wanted. And I don't want anyone to sit across the room from their son or their loved one and tell them that they want to die, that they're not going to go on. Every time I got a phone call with that number, my heart was in my throat, because I thought, is this the call that tells me he's gone? Do you know what I mean? You know, the same as you, like you said, with your dad, you know, listening to on the phone, you are his daughter, you know in 2 words what kind of state he's in. You know, and that's all we want to express. You know, like, I'm like you, if you've committed a crime, that's fine about punishment, but actually it's not fine that if they're inhumanely treated and their mental health isn't dealt with and they come out dead, that's not fine. Yeah. And how is your dad now?
Well, I mean, he's certainly a whole lot better than he was. He's still in a mental health hospital. The skin condition is still an issue, but not as bad as it was. I mean, he's a pensioner, he's nearly 70 years old, like, you know, there's only so much kind of stresses and strains that the body can take. He spent over 12 months in that cell. Had a vitamin D deficiency because he didn't access sunlight. If you're in a very small cell, just kind of lying on a bed all day for 12 months, something has to give, and unfortunately, it's affected his kind of mobility. Mentally, he's certainly better than he was. He's getting the medication that he needs. But, you know, obviously that paranoia of the system, when you've been in a prison and, you know, you're shouting that people are trying to kill you in there, and actually I happen to agree with him that, you know, that, they didn't look after you in there. You were close to death. But he's alive and he's safe, and I know that in that hospital he's getting the antipsychotics he needs. I can now actually physically go into the hospital and go and visit him. So that means that I'm able to sleep at night knowing that they are actually looking after him. And I'm now in a situation where I'm working with the hospital to create a plan of, you know, what's going to happen when he comes out. So we're actually now looking at some kind of future, whereas obviously in the prison I couldn't see beyond him coming out in a wooden box. So what about your son?
My son's, he's really well now. It took over 2 years to stabilise him. I mean, the actual consultant said to me, I can't believe they let him get that ill. But he's really well now, really, really well. The hospital worked fantastically with us. He's now living in his own flat with his girlfriend. He hasn't gone back to work yet, but he is aiming for that. And I just think the system let him down. You know, I mean, there's the stigma of mental health, but there's also the stigma of prison. So when the two are together, it's sort of a double whammy, isn't it? Do you know, like, and people assume that they're just all bad people, and they're not, you know. They're not. They're just products of how our justice system works or doesn't work. And how are you now? How do you feel?
I mean, I'm absolutely fine. I mean, the fact that he's being looked after means that I'm now able to kind of sleep at night. He's able to reforge those relationships with his grandchildren and stuff like that. Those things make me happy. But, you know, I'm just disappointed that this ever happened. And for me, I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else. Yeah. Because what me and my family have been through has been absolutely horrendous. And it didn't need to be this way. I have days where I'm very teary about it. It's still very, very raw for me. It needs to change. We are not living in the 16th century anymore. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, that the Justice Secretary needs to kind of hear these stories from the people that are actually living it. You know, he hasn't walked a mile in my shoes, and, you know, me and you aren't the only people that this is happening to. So what do you want to see happen? For me, I just kind of want to see an end to the court system kind of thinking that it's an acceptable place to send mentally ill people to prisons. That can never be the answer for me. No. Mentally ill people should not be in our prisons. 1000%. Never.